Hello everybody, Vince Venturella here. Just wanted to make a video sort of discussing a few disparate topics, namely sort of spontaneous order PvP and the future of Warhammer, especially as possibly told by that guy right there, Archaon. Yeah, got this. I was reading through it, and as I was looking through the book, much puff has been made on the internet over the past couple of days. Since on late Wednesday, it broke that there was this page in here wherein you sort of had these rules for, sort of complete unbound within Warhammer, right? So it looks like that. Just a quick flash there. Oh, there you go. And it looks like that. And I think that the thing that wasn't in that image was something I read once I got the book. And once I read it, sort of the entire plan of Games Workshop and how much I respected what they're doing and what all this means, especially with these rules changes, sort of became clear to me. So at risk of having Games Workshop get very angry at me, I just want to read one little quick sentence to you. As part of the final book in the End Time series, it felt only appropriate to include rules that give players the freedom to build the army they've always wanted to play with. And then blah, 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 blah. Okay. It goes on to basically explain this is why they're doing Unbound, and it says you can do all these crazy things. Of course, you and your opponent can agree to carry on using rules for choosing your army presented in the Warhammer rulebook or in earlier End Times books. But we'd like you to give them a go, especially when playing these scenarios, of which there are many, and they're actually quite interesting. And sort of everything kind of became clear to me, because there's been a lot of fear over, is this what 9th edition looks like? I realized that what a lot of people have always asked for is for GW to present more options to play, to evolve the story, to add more to the world, because it felt static. The worst the game can ever be is static. When it's just releasing another army book and another army book, and they're all fairly standard, and they all sort of shoot down the middle, and they all maintain a regular even keel. That produces a nice tournament scene. Unfortunately, that doesn't produce a very energetic game, and it produces one that atrophies. I've talked about the need for churn in previous videos. You can go back and watch those if you want to see what I mean. But effectively, you need some level of energy and excitement. And everybody's kind of asked for this, and so I think what I sort of realized as I was reading this final book is that GW listened and actually did all of it all at once. If they have one great sin, and I've said it before in videos, it's that they don't communicate well. And I feel like they could have really solved a lot of these issues if early on they had just sort of said, look, we heard you, and we're going to do all of it at once. And we're going to tell an ongoing narrative, and as we tell that narrative, we're going to sort of provide rules that evolve and change the game to meet that narrative. And if that sounds really crazy or ridiculous, which I don't think it is, let's just go. Let me present another game that does that actually quite regularly. And you may like or hate this game, and that's fine. But consider a game like Magic: The Gathering. So I assume most people probably at least passing familiarity with it. It's a collectible card game made by Wizards of the Coast. The rules in that game completely suit the narrative of what's going on in that set. So, for example, some time ago when they went to like the Zendikar block, where the whole block was based around the land and, these big earth modes and these creatures that slept in the world and stuff like that, all of a sudden, all these new special abilities and rules got created that had to do with land and the playing of land and the destruction of land and searching of land and all that stuff. So I actually don't think it's that out there of a concept. It's just not something that's really been done in war games. But I also think that what that speaks to is that I don't think you're necessarily seeing a vision of what 9th is in this any more than you are in any other book of the End Times or any other previous particular rule you've seen out of any book. Because I feel like what this is them telling a story and providing the rules for that story. And you may say, well, that's fine, Vince, but they put it into the FAQ with something like 50% Lords and Heroes, and they made it real. Well, perhaps it just suited both in that case. They didn't add in Kane Magic or Chaos Ascendant or anything like that. They left all of those up to the community. So perhaps in that case, they just felt it was both a good change to the base rules and something that fit the story, as sort of Nagash rose and Great Heroes became central into the story. But the second thing, and what I really want to get into, is the idea of this unbound thing. Let's just assume for a moment that this sort of choose anything you like. And to sort of go in, I don't want to get into too deep a detail of what the rules are. I'm sure you've heard it from other videos. We mentioned it on Warhammer Weekly. It's effectively exactly what you thought. So the percentage restrictions are removed. You can choose any number of anything you want, right? And yeah, then like the individual unit selection, duplicate rules are removed. So the easiest way to make you understand what I mean is if you wanted to make an army of 10 steam tanks, you could. Then that'd be a 2,500 point army. And I'm sure your brain immediately fires off with, OMG, we're all going to die. And that would be a fair response. But I actually want to present a couple ways why this might not be actually impossible. And again, I'm not saying that I even think this is where Ninth is going. I would just like to present some ideas for how this could actually work. So one of the things Anthony mentioned in his video when he talked about this was he's surprised this hasn't already happened. And then very shortly after, I watched a video from Victor Case where he said that actually pre this book ever existing, at his local game store, they're doing an escalation league and starting at 1,000 points, and they were already using that rule. It had been in plans for quite a while. They just take whatever you want. There are people who are going to take 3 models. There are people who are going to take a normal army. Okay. So what I really want to talk about is spontaneous order. And spontaneous order is how a thing like that could work. So what's spontaneous order? Well, it's sort of the idea of how things just self-organize, but I'll make it much simpler. If you've ever been to a roller skating rink, which I imagine if you're like young, you might not know what a roller skating rink is. I don't know if they still exist, but it was a big deal when I was a kid. I spent a lot of time at the roller skating rink trying to, playing video games and trying to, skate with a girl, of course. The couple skate, always the most depressing time to skate alone. So a skating rink is a pretty insane thing. Think about what it is. It's a big open flat area where probably the floor is solid wood and the walls are maybe have some carpet on them, but are basically concrete. And what happens is we take a bunch of people of varying skill levels with skating who want to skate at various speeds, and we give them various qualities of skates, and we just turn them loose and say, go ahead, knock yourself out. Well, or don't, please. We would rather you don't and sue us. And what's crazy is if you think about that, it seems insane that we would let that happen. If you consider the rest of normal life, think about how you drive and all the sort of things that are there helping you drive and stay like in your lane, lights and all that stuff. But yet in a skating rink, somehow humans become like a flock of birds, and we all just sort of self-organize. Slow people stay in one area, fast people, and it's not that accidents don't happen and people don't occasionally bump into each other. They do, and I'm sure people get hurt. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that in general, for the most part, people self-organize and skating rinks work. And that happens because collisions are what you're trying to avoid. And collisions have this really wonderful thing that they hurt both people. So when you collide with somebody, it's generally, unless it's like you colliding with a 2-year-old kid and you're a full-grown adult, it's generally going to be injurious to both of you. And so both of you have equal incentive to avoid it. In much the same way, I think that both players at the Warhammer table have a set of shared goals. They also have a conflicting goal. But I think that there's a set of shared goals that would make self-organization possible. So, namely, that is, we both want to play this game. We both want to play this game again in the future. we both want to theoretically have a good time. So those are 3 shared goals to pretty much every Warhammer game. Now there's a 4th goal of I would very much like to win. Now how much you value that sort of depends on your psychographic profile, which is again something I talked about in a previous video. But let's assume you want to win to some degree. And for you to win, the other person has to lose, and they have a conflicting goal. Now, what that means is that we have to accept a rules construct. Now, games themselves, so Fredrick Hayek, who's a very classic economist, theorized that games themselves are spontaneous organization. Because we both want to win at something, and so we basically become subservient to a set of master rules that guide our attempts to defeat each other in this game. But all of that still applies whether there's a percentage-based chart or not, right? All that's still governing what's going on. But what you really need is just a set of rules that make it so spontaneous order happens. A sort of, think of it like you need the right nest to keep the sort of egg of spontaneous order warm. And you might think, well, Vince, that's impossible. I'm not sure that's the case. How I would picture it working and sort of and again, I don't think it actually will be the case that this becomes that sort of unbound thing becomes 9th edition, but if it did, here's a way it could work. Every sort of unit type, let's picture there being sort of 3 main things going on, which is blocks of infantry, unique characters, and then like let's clump monsters and war machines, kind of very destructive single forces together, right? And if all 3 of those were to have strengths and weaknesses in a sort of rock, paper, scissors fashion, and they were all to be very good against one of the other 2 in a set way, then the spontaneous order that would arise would be that you would want a balanced force and not to skew off on 10 steam tanks, because you're going to be missing 2 necessary components that lose you the game. And so you might say, well, I don't think that game could be designed. And I would say, it already has been. It already has been a lot of times. And I would point to the second thing that's in this title, which is PvP. So if you've ever played an MMO, you're probably at least tangentially aware of player versus player combat. And in games that favor groups, or favor sort of a group combat style, let's say a 6-man group or an 8-man group, the groups that are most successful on that sort of a platform are those who have an equal sort of right balanced measure of tanks, DPS, and healing, right? There's these 3 classic archetypes of the game, and to win you need them in balance. If you've got a group of 8 casters, you're very explosive, you'll probably kill 2 or 3 people in the enemy group, but then once they get into you, you're dead. And you lose that fight. Same thing if you're all tanks or whatever. It doesn't work. You have to have balance, because the governing mechanisms that are the foundation for the system make that the emergent spontaneous order, that people self-organize into these groups to be the most successful. And that's what it's all about. It's not about some sort of like moral code of let's all be fair and fun. Sometimes that can have an impact. I want to have a fun game, you want to have a fun game, let's be nice friends to each other. But on a deeper level, you can make the rules make it the right choice. So there's an alignment of principles that for the first 3, I want to play again in the future, so I can't piss you off or make you hate me, and we want to have fun, then aligns with the 4th goal of that's how I win. And so it becomes, if we both have these relatively balanced things, we know that's the right way to build, then it really becomes a true test of skill. So that's how that sort of unbound or unorganized, unforecharted thing could work. And I'm sure somebody's going to say, but Vince, they already have not done a great job with that in 40K, and what about the 8th edition rule books? Well, you know, I mean, if the undergirded rules were changed, then theoretically the 8th edition rules would fit right in. You wouldn't even need new army books, because if the undergirded rules were such that blocks of infantry and characters and these destructive items, monsters, and war machines had their effects, then the 8th edition things would just gain or would just increase or decrease in value. I mean, you've seen that before. Cavalry was really good in 7th edition and became less good in 8th edition. The book didn't change necessarily. Like if I had, pre me getting a new 8th edition book, I had cavalry. It was the same unit. But on day 1, it was good. On day 2, it was not as good. Right? So the underlying rules can change the value and quality of a thing and make you change your lists and organize differently. So why am I telling you all this? Well, for 2 things. One, because I think it's kind of cool, and I think that I wanted to share this sort of realization with you that I think Games Workshop is doing a really cool thing by making the rules match the narrative so that they are empowering you to actually tell the story with them. In fact, there's a big narrative scenario arc in here, which is really cool, called Halting the End Times, or Halting the Apocalypse, I should say. And if that doesn't make you think that it was possible for them to win, I don't know what does. And that we don't necessarily know the shape of what 9th is yet, or what time it takes place in. If it even takes place in one time, it could take place in many. That's one of the rumors, that you actually would have 3 different times. But I think that it's cool that they're empowering us to tell their story with them. I think it's a neat idea. I wish they would have told us they were doing that. But reading the last book, it occurred to me that felt like what they were doing. And the second thing I want to do with this is much the same thing I'm always trying to do, which is to say, let's not be doom and gloom and, make like this is the end of the world. It's a game. We all play it. We all adhere to a social contract. And if we want to have fun and be positive about it and play with our friends or play in tournaments, then we will have fun. And the game will be positive. Nothing that was printed in here in any way ruined my day. In fact, I loved everything in this book that I've read so far. It made me excited for what's coming, for what's in here, to try some of these options, to play some of these scenarios, to have some of these characters on the table. And of course, I know that other people in my group will want to do the same thing. And if we try them and they're not fun, cool, we won't use them again. Great. But we tried something new. It made me excited to sit down and play a game, to experience something new I haven't done before. And, I'm thankful to Games Workshop for doing that. I could have always done that. I could always just make up rules on my own. But we all can do that all the time. But when it's written, it's real. And it's nice to have the framework of it, for you not to have to sit down and worry about balance and all that stuff, to have them do it. That's why we buy these games from them. We could be writing them ourselves, but we don't. I don't build my car myself. I go buy it from somebody because they're the expert and they've made cars for a long time. So that's, I think, what I want to say is, let's be positive about the change. Give it a try. See what you think. And maybe we don't know as much about the shape of things to come as we thought we did. I think if you really read the book and you look in between the lines, there's a lot of text in there that says, we're changing the rules because that's what fits the story at this moment. And if that's still to be the case, then I think that 9th edition, especially if it was set multiple times, could have different rule sets and different options. And I'm, for one, always excited for a world, especially a world of Warhammer, with a lot more options. So, as always, this is a dialogue, and I want to know what you think. Leave your comments down below, and I'll respond and get back to you. Subscribe if you haven't yet subscribed for more videos. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.